Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tommy Johnson from the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce coming at you on our first webinar of the week. We're excited to have you all join us today. Thank you very much for registering for today's webinar, which is how to lead a virtual team with Erin Lessard. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things, and I want to tell you a little bit about Erin as well. We will have an opportunity for Q&A throughout the presentation. If you're logged in, over on the right-hand side, you'll be able to type questions. We do have Andrea Chim from the Chamber as well, reading those questions, and she will interject and interrupt Erin if it's appropriate to the conversation. The presentation should last about 20 minutes or so. Again, at the end of that, we will have an official Q&A time where we'll be able to answer questions specifically once the presentation is over. Another housekeeping note, I just want to mention that Erin will be joining us on the 23rd as well for another webinar. The topic will be decision-making in turbulent times. And again, this is an opportunity for us to join Erin for that presentation as well. But before we get going, I did want to just introduce Erin a little bit here. Erin brings a ton of experience in this field. She is an expert and coach. She's done a lot of consulting for many leaders for Fortune 500 companies all around the world. She worked internally as an organizational consultant in the financial service industry. She did found her own company, Lessard Consulting, to help companies make better strategic decisions, build stronger teams, and develop their leaders. Erin's approach is influenced by a study of organizational systems and psychological and social adult development. She blends resource-oriented drive and reflective practice that has transformed hundreds of clients' lives and businesses. Erin is a professional certified coach from the International Coaching Federation. She's a certified coach and strategic consultant for Lead by Greatness. That's through the Lapin International. And she holds an MBA from Duquesne University. And I'm also really excited for her. She just recently published her new book, which is available on Amazon in both a digital and print format. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Erin Lessard.
Thanks so much, Tommy. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Excited to get to share some of my thoughts with you on leading virtually and a little bit about the sort of different perspectives I hold on this. So I've led teams in person and led virtual teams. I've been a member of virtual teams, both where there's formal leadership and where it's more of an ad hoc group, worked in nonprofits and corporations, and coached and consulted with lots of folks. So I bring all these different perspectives in, and I know that there's no one way to lead a team. There's no one way to lead virtually. So I recognize that we're all coming at this from different places, and I'll represent a little bit of that as we get into this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share some slides with you all. And as Tommy mentioned, do chat in your questions, and we'll take a couple of breaks to hear what thoughts are coming up for you, and we'll definitely save time at the end for plenty of Q&A as well. So let me know what is on your mind as we go through this. So an important thing to recognize here is that you're not just coming new into managing a virtual team for the first time. This has been forced on you. You didn't choose to lead virtually, yet you're here. So there's this how do I lead virtually well question we're holding. And you're leading virtually during a crisis. Leading during a crisis is different than leading in normal times. And whether your industry is deeply impacted from this or your team members are, this is different leadership than what we're accustomed to. So we have to hold those two things together. So I'll be talking about leadership in general in the virtual space, and then sort of putting that overlay of what it means to do this also in the time that we're in now that is unfamiliar. So a little bit about what we'll talk about: building trust, how to do that in the virtual space, what it means to recalibrate expectations now, how we do that well, what we look for, how we hold people accountable in this virtual space, what kind of technology you need to be considering, and what authentic leadership looks like now, and how that can actually motivate your team going forward. And then, of course, we'll have the Q&A time. So I want to start just by talking about what's different about leading virtually than leading in person. And I'm sure you have discovered lots of things that are different over the last couple of weeks, but a few that I want to highlight. The first is that connection doesn't happen organically in a virtual space. So you have probably thought at some point over these last couple of weeks, wow, I get so much done when I work from home. That's really common. When people have the opportunity to work from home, they recognize how productive they can be when people aren't always popping into their office and they're not running into folks and having informal conversations. And that's true. That heads down time is super valuable. You can get lots done. But what we often don't recognize is the value of what's happening during all of those interruptions throughout the day. So that's where connection's happening. That's where people are seeing how their leaders lead. That's where people are overhearing conversations and learning the context that they're working within. So in the virtual space, that won't happen organically. We have to falsely create it, and it will feel a little fake at first. It will feel like it's put on and forced, and then it becomes the normal. So if you aren't already having meetings with your team differently than you would have before, probably more meetings right now, that's something you need to pay attention to so that you create that connection that you and your team members are used to. Second big thing is you can't see people working. So we have all fallen victim to assuming that if somebody's at their desk, well, we at least know they're at their desk, they're working. And I am sure that every person watching this has also been at their desk and been unproductive and focused on things that maybe weren't as relevant to some of your priorities. So just because you can see people at their desk doesn't mean that they're being productive or working anyway, right? So now we're in this virtual space and we can't see them working at all. If you have a chat or some sort of live function that you pay attention to and you're looking for green dots to see if people are there, green dots don't mean that they're doing the work. Green dots mean that a camera's on, right? Or that people have recently moved to a website. So we have to shift what we pay attention to manage productivity and work and assess whether or not people are working. We'll talk about that in a little bit and what you can do differently in the virtual space. Another thing that's different is that people will silo unless you're really intentional about creating collaborative structures. So just like I said a minute ago, how nice it can be to have your heads down time and get so much work done because no one's interrupting you. Same thing goes for your team members. They're relishing being able to get a little more done, especially if they have bigger projects that take more effort to focus on. But they are going to stay in their siloed, in their focused lane, unless there is a structure in place to help them bridge it. Even if they have interdependent work, even if their work requires them to collaborate with other people, you're going to see a slowdown in collaboration unless you're helping them intentionally create the structures. And it is most likely through meetings that perhaps they didn't have to schedule before, but now they do. It doesn't have to be hour-long meetings. It can be 10-hour stand-up check-in meetings, but we have to create different structures when we're leading virtual teams. And finally, trust has to be cultivated a little differently in the virtual space. Chances are you are used to in-person leadership, and so you have some trust already established. You need to figure out how to carry that forward. If you've always been in a virtual space or this is familiar to you, you still need to cultivate trust in a little bit of a different way. And again, we have the overlay of crisis that we're leading in that changes what trust looks like. So I'm going to break this down a little bit. And after I go through this trust piece, we'll stop for some questions. So how does trust happen? Well, there's this great work developed by Charles Green that talks about what creates trust, and it's made up of our credibility plus our reliability plus intimacy. But those three things can be diminished depending on our self-orientation. And I'll go through what each one of these means and how we build them. But if we are self-focused, then we detract from our own credibility and reliability and intimacy. And I've often heard that there's a 3-to-1 ratio of deposits to withdrawals when it comes to trust. So for every withdrawal, every time you break someone's trust or do something that diminishes trust, it takes 3 deposits to pull that trust back to where it was before. So this self-orientation piece is really important for us to pay attention to. We can't just build our credibility, reliability, and intimacy if we are still perceived to have a self-orientation and not an other orientation. It'll diminish how other people experience us as a leader and how much they trust us. So let's start by looking at credibility, what it is and how you build it. Credibility is all about, can I believe what you say? Are you competent as a leader in your job? So to do this in a virtual space, it's really important that we shoot straight, that we tell people what's going on and not talk in too much code language or things that feel like they're being glossed over. In an in-person setting, we can hear context differently. So we can hear side conversations, we can observe how people are interacting or what they're saying. So even if we're being given something that feels a little sugar-coated, we can make sense of the broader picture. In a virtual environment, we don't have access to all of that. So it's really important that as leaders, we be candid and talk about what's going on. We're going to balance that a little bit, and I'll talk about that on the next slide when we get to reliability. But you do need to pay attention to the way you're saying things and building connection with people, having the conversations, keeping them in the loop, because they don't have access to it most likely without you. So pay attention to that. And now we add in the COVID components. And people are also thinking of, when they're thinking about credibility, they're thinking about, are you demonstrating leadership in this crisis? So how do we do that? How do we demonstrate leadership? What do they need from us to build our credibility here? And listening is one of the key things that you can do now. Many of us are promoted because we're good problem solvers. And so when we listen, we're diagnosing, we're listening for what needs to be solved, what can I do to fix it? And in this instance, you can't fix this, right? You can't fix COVID. You can't put us all back to work right now. You can't solve the fact that they're homeschooling their kids while working or whatever their challenges are. This is not yours to solve. It's yours to just hear and empathize with. This is going to be your biggest tool, your power player during this time to develop your credibility as a leader, is your developing your capacity to listen without necessarily trying to solve. If there are things you can help with, absolutely do that. But the critical thing is for people to feel heard and listened to. And then, like I mentioned with shooting straight, share the plan, even if it's a moving target. Let people know what you're talking about, what you're thinking of, how you intend to move forward, that you're having these conversations, even if you don't fully know what the future looks like. Keep the conversation going. That will build your credibility as a leader. So when we talk about reliability, what people are looking for is follow through. Do you do what you say? And in the virtual space, it's as simple as, can I get a hold of you? When I reach out, do you respond? Are you available to me? And specific to the virtual space, to build your reliability, keep your meetings, show up on time, be available to them. If you're one who has to push meetings around because different things come on your calendar, whether it's customers or colleagues, if you're pushing around the meetings that you set aside for your team, you're going to lose your reliability with them, particularly in the virtual space. They need to know that you're present for them and available. And so add in the COVID stuff. They want you to be a buffer. What I mean by that is that if you're in a middle management space in particular, you run this tightrope walk of being responsible for cascading down management decisions that sometimes you're a part of and sometimes you're not, and supporting the team below you. Sometimes we assume that means I'm on their side, I'm on this team against management. That is not a good look. That's not a good place to be as a manager. You need to be that buffer. So sometimes things are rough up here and you may not agree with the direction. You need to find the way to be the buffer so that you can support your team in it. You can still talk about what's hard. You can talk about your challenges, but commiserating with them is going to shoot you in the foot as a leader. It's not going to build your credibility or your reliability. So be that buffer, especially now as people are trying to figure out how to do their work in this new environment. And so how do you do this? Listening again shows up alongside of, do help them solve their problems where you can. So they're trying to figure out, how do I work in this new environment? What tools do I need? What's getting in my way that I used to know how to solve? Help them figure that out. Show your support and your connection to them, and that will help you build reliability. Intimacy. Again, it's about listening. Do you understand my perspective? Can you share in my challenges? So what do you need to do? You need to listen. You need to build empathy. I often think of empathy as the ability to be with someone else who's frustrated or angry or upset, and to be able to sit alongside of that without getting triggered into defensiveness, without checking out, being able to just be present with people in whatever struggle they're in. Sometimes you've caused that struggle when you're giving tough feedback, and you need to be able to just sit with them as they react and not have your own reaction. Same thing comes here with the intimacy to help build trust, being able to share in that human experience so that they know that they're safe. This is about creating safety for people. So we add the COVID piece, and this is about, does my manager, does my leader understand what I'm challenged with now? Can I talk about it? Am I safe here? And the do this is the same. There's not a special additional do this for this stuff, because it's the same thing. It's listening and building empathy with the people on your team. Self-orientation. This is all about not taking credit for other people's work. Do you make everything about you? Who's at the center of your stories? Are you at the center of your stories, or your people, your team, your collective accomplishment? So what do you need to do? You need to manage your defensive reactions. We don't often think about this as being a selfish act to sort of be defended or defend ourselves against others, but it often represents a self-orientation versus an other orientation. You need to be able to hold an other focus, share credit, make sure people know that you are as concerned with their success as you are with your own growth. It's okay to be concerned with your own career trajectory and growth. Just make sure you're making space for other people's as well. So adding in the COVID, are you listening? People want to know, are you going to take care of me? You may not know the answer to that. How you show up in that question matters a great deal. Expressing your care and understanding the concerns that others are holding is going to be critical for you. So Andrea, I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions that are coming in particular to this trust piece before I keep moving forward with the rest of the presentation.
No questions yet. I would recommend just keep on going.
Perfect. Perfect. We'll keep going. Thanks. Okay, so let's talk about expectations. How do we adjust our expectations, both for the difference between being physically present and virtual, but also in the crisis we're in? First piece is that if you haven't already noticed this, I'm sure you will soon, that productivity is simply going to slow down. We're in a huge change initiative, and anytime change is happening, productivity changes. It's not right or wrong, it's just human nature. So productivity is going to slow down for you as you're figuring this out, and you need to be okay with that and help people get what they need so that you can get back to a level that's expected. So recognize that. The second piece is to assume positive intent. We are wired to sort of assume things about people's behavior. When if you think about someone driving fast down the highway, someone zooms past you and you've probably said to yourself, oh, what a jerk, right? But if you're going faster than usual, it's probably because you're late to a meeting or you need to get to pick up your kids on time. So it's situational for you, but it's about the character of that other jerk who flew past you. We tend to do this and not give people the benefit of the doubt. Assume the positive intent of your people. Assume that they want to be working. Assume that they want to do a good job for you, even if the data that you're observing suggests otherwise. still have the conversation, but come into that conversation from an assumption that this is situational and not a character flaw, especially because of the challenges that we're all in. To keep motivation going, I really recommend thinking about your milestones a little differently. So often, if we're working on big projects, we have milestones that are a little further out, and we all kind of know our place toward them. But to keep people motivated and collaborating and working together during this time, finding the shorter term milestones. What is our intent to accomplish this week? What's our intent to accomplish next week? Will help you keep things moving and keep people motivated to continue momentum where that's important for you. And finally, we need to shift what we're managing and seeing in productivity. If you're used to managing input, and by that I mean time in seat, time at desk, if that is your typical measurement of whether or not people are working, you're going to be much happier, they're going to be much happier if you shift to output. What are you expecting them to produce? What can you measure that lets you know that they have accomplished what is expected of them, different from whether or not their green light is showing up or they're answering emails the second you send them, or whether or not they're available 24/7. That's the biggest risk we run in this virtual space, is that all of a sudden it's easier for everybody to be present all the time and harder to turn off. So you need to be really intentional about setting the boundaries, the expectations, what you're measuring, what you're looking for. The more you can talk about these things, the better off you all will be. So let's talk a little bit here about communications and what to expect. So you do want to share what you know, speak with authority. That'll help you build your credibility and make this two-way conversations. The more you're able to seek their input, understand their perspective, the more you listen, the more they'll talk, the more information you'll get. Have real conversations. One of the biggest pitfalls I think I made in my career the first time I was managing a virtual team was I shied away from some tough conversations. I remember having a team member who wouldn't respond as quickly as I expected her to. And I knew that some of my expectations were probably unrealistic. So I never had the conversations, and it damaged my trust in her and probably her trust in me as well. It's critical that we have those conversations with an open mind, coming in and saying, hey, I've noticed that it takes you 2 hours to respond to an email. That surprises me. I expect you to be more available than that. Let's set up our norms and expectations and talk about what we need from each other. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. That will be your best friend in the virtual space. And then finally, with your team, you're going to want to set up some expectations of what your communication channels look like. What's formal, what's informal. So if you don't already have different technology other than email, you're going to want some of that. Let me move on to look at what technology is going to be beneficial for you here. So having text features, whether you're texting on your phone or have a chat feature through a technology, if you're using Microsoft 365, Teams has options for this. I'm really familiar with Slack, which is a great technology for having different conversations that are much more informal. They're quicker. You don't need to craft a message quite in the same way that you do with email. Email has become a more formal way of communicating. And it's really cumbersome if that's your only written or text communication during this virtual time. So explore different options. There are lots of free options out there with this. You don't need to purchase anything yet. This is easy to play around with and try different technologies before you commit. When it comes to file and document sharing, if you don't already have this, and most organizations have this now, but if you don't already have a sort of way for everybody to access digital files and collaborate on them, it's really important that you think long-term on this and not just stopgap. The biggest risk you run is that you try something and it's not the right system for you, and then you've got to mess with documentation and how do we move forward with it. So think about this collectively, get input before creating something just on the fly here. And now the big question, to Zoom or not to Zoom. Do you need video capabilities for this time? So my answer is yes and no. When I was leading virtually, we didn't have webcams. Not everybody had the technology, and we could still create a strong team dynamic just by having phone conversations. However, today it is so prolific and so easy, and most of us have technology and have computers that have come with webcams. It's not additional things we need to purchase. If it's not an investment for you, absolutely use video conferencing. It changes the dynamic. It keeps people engaged in a very different way. It helps you build connection. You do want to pay attention to how much time you're in meetings, just like you don't want your calendar full of meetings all day when you're in the office. You don't really want that in the virtual space either. And I know a lot of people are relying heavily on this right now. At some point, you're going to need to calibrate what's real and realistic for you as a team. Not everything has to be an hour-long meeting. Do shorter 10-minute check-ins. You can still have some phone conversations. Not everything has to be video, but video is a good way to connect. So definitely don't purchase anything right now unless you think this is a longer-term solution for your team, but there are lots of free options out there that you can play with. A bit about authenticity here, and this has a lot to do with where we are right now and the importance of leading from a place of authenticity during this crisis. I was recently on a phone conversation with people who had very different leadership responsibilities right now. One of them was a CEO of an e-commerce company whose revenue had increased by 75% as people are shopping from home. And another was the director of nursing homes who was losing staff and losing their patients, their elderly population to the virus. And another person was in a large financial institution and trying to figure out how to process all these payroll protection requests. And a couple of things really stood out to me. And one was the value of talking about what's real and how leaders are feeling during this time and being able to acknowledge the uncertainty and pairing that with strong leadership and decisiveness and direction. So if you're just being decisive but not showing up as human, you're losing credibility. If you're just showing up as human and not being decisive, you're losing credibility. So it's really the blend of the two in this kind of an environment. So how do you build this? Well, the first thing I really want to encourage you to do, 15 minutes a day on something that matters to you. Sometimes that's just getting through a to-do list, paying attention to something that's important, not just something that's urgent. Sometimes it's more personal development. It's taking time to read or to meditate if that is something that's in your practice and helps ground you. Make sure you're giving yourself the time so that you can show up as the kind of leader people need. Second thing here is to know what matters to you, know what matters to your company. And one of the things I want to share as part of this webinar for all of you who signed up for this, Tommy mentioned that I have a book that just released, and one of my chapters is on recognizing your values and understanding your values and knowing how to lead from them. So I'm going to share that with the chamber, and they will share this out with all of you. So you can take some time. If you don't know off the top of your head what your values are, you're in really good company. A lot of us don't lead that way, and it's incredibly helpful and beneficial to know that and lead that way. And then the third piece is just simply connecting. By connecting to others, you will build your authenticity. They will know more who you are. So here are my takeaways for you, the couple of things I really want to make sure that you remember coming out of this to help you lead better in this virtual time. You're going to have to rely on your soft skills to lead your team through this. You're going to have to use those trust building components to really show up as the leader they need. Know your communication channels, use them appropriately, talk about it, have real conversations about your expectations and manage your output, not just the input. And think about long-term, whether you expect employees will want more work from home options in the future, or if this is just a blip and you assume that things will go back to how they were before. Do think about the long term when you're making these technology decisions. Don't just find stopgap solutions. So with that, we're gonna open it up to some questions, and I do want to make sure you all know that as Lessard Consulting, we're here to help. This is an unfamiliar territory. You know, I've never led through a pandemic, and though I have coached hundreds of people, none of them have ever led through a pandemic. So we are all in new territory together. And whether it's leadership development or executive coaching or planning for the future, Lessard Consulting is here and happy to help. You're welcome to send any questions to me, of course, in the chat function here, but you can also send questions to me at info@lessardconsulting.com. If you're watching this in the replay and have questions, feel free to shoot some my way. I'd happy to set up some conversations that way. And information at lessardconsulting.com or decisionflow.net. That's my new book there, Decision Flow. It's on Amazon. I have a 10-week masterclass that goes with it, and it's all about how we make decisions in tough times when the stakes are high. You know, I had no clue how high the global stakes would be when I wrote this last year. And yet here we all are together. So those resources are there for you. And I will be sharing that chapter on values. Hopefully you should be able to get that within the week. And so with that, Andrea, let's open it up. If any questions have come through, I am happy to spend some time with those.
Yeah, definitely. We have one question came in. It's about how do leaders of small teams, speaking generally from about 6 to 15 people, use team members to lead their peers?
Yeah, so how do you build up an environment where team members can lead each other and not everything relies on the leader of the team? That's a great question. And the things that come to mind for me are building trust among the team. So just like you as a leader have to have credibility and reliability and intimacy and can be impacted by your self-orientation, same thing goes with members of your team. So if you see team members who don't have any of those particular things, you want to have some conversations to help them recognize what they're missing and how to build it. Because if the team members don't trust each other, it will be hard for them to trust each other's leadership, right? Another important thing that comes to mind is to be able to talk about roles. So if you have different projects going on, you can assign different leadership to different folks for different projects, and that when you're having the conversation with the team and setting up the expectation, Julie's gonna lead us through this project, that can help pave the way for other team members, so long as everybody is kind of given the opportunity to provide some leadership. And then as you talk about the expectations in this new world, being able to share that expectation. Here's how we're going to lead this going forward. Here's where I'm available and going to lead things. And here's where I expect you to help each other and support each other. Sometimes you may have to help them set up that structure initially. I think you should be meeting weekly to have these conversations, whatever is right for you there. You will have to help create the structure, create the expectation, have the conversations with the team as a whole, and then also with individuals if there are places where they're less trustworthy among the team, to help them build up those components.
So our next question has to deal with like your advice or your, any tips that you offer for delegating authority effectively.
So this would be if you have someone on your team who you're delegating something to, they don't have formal authority, I'm assuming, but you need them to be in charge of something. So in this sort of a situation, your role is one of support. Sometimes that means paving the way, almost politically, if you will, for them, making sure that you're communicating to everybody what you are delegating to them and what you're expecting them to be able to do, and needing everybody else's support for that. Support can also look like how you set them up with their peers, or if it's going outside of your team, if they have to lead something with another department or people who they don't always have interaction with, the way you talk about them will help set them up for success. You will, especially if this is the first time you're doing this, you're going to need to do a lot of debriefing with them. What you don't want to do is tell them what you expect of them and then just sort of set them out in the water and leave them alone, set them out to sea without helping them. So debrief with them. Be the place where they can talk about what worked and didn't work, and help them understand what they could do differently going forward. So really do treat it as a development opportunity and make sure that you're having the conversations to help them get better. You don't want to set someone up for failure. You don't want to set them up for something that they can't actually succeed at. So make sure you're calibrating what they're capable of with what you're giving them, and then pave the way for them and make sure that you're having the right conversations so that they can continue to improve.
Great. And then our last question, I believe, before we wrap up here, is more about you and your business and the type of clients that you work with.
Yeah, so it varies. I've been really lucky to get to work with some really, really large companies and have learned a ton from doing that work. But I also really love working with small companies, from nonprofits to family-owned businesses and smaller organizations. So there's no sort of one size fits all approach. What I do in big companies is different than what I do in small companies. My expectations of them are a little bit different, but I love doing the work on both sides. So in large companies, it's working with teams, often with senior leaders, to help them set strategy and understand what kind of leaders they need to execute that strategy. So it's doing that work. And then with smaller companies, it's a little more looking at the whole enchilada. Like, what all are we trying to accomplish? Do we have the right strategy? Do we have the right leaders to lead the strategy? How do we need to develop people to really make this happen in the right way? So yes, I'll work with your company. I would be happy to have conversations and understand more what is your challenge, and how I might suggest an approach to help you work through that.
We actually have one last question that came just now. It's, how can I encourage employees / team members to seek out new tools that will help them do their job in this environment?
Yeah, so it's a great suggestion there, that yes, there is opportunity for you as a leader to provide tools, and there's opportunity for your team members to seek out what they need. So you may need to have a conversation that helps them sort of get clear on what their challenges are and what's in their way, what kind of things they need to consider. And then if you can set them loose to find tools, absolutely set them loose to do that. You can set this up as a project. If your team members are all sort of looking for similar challenges or similar solutions, you can say, okay, here's how we're going to go. Who's going to lead this? Here's that opportunity again to delegate. Who wants to lead this charge? And what different things do we need to look for? How are we going to go about this? Where are we going to find the experts who are already experiencing this in other ways and solving this problem? What can we learn from? So your role should be facilitating their self-organization. If people are just complaining about not having the technology, but not willing to do some researching to understand how to solve it, that's a conversation you need to have. I recognize that you have this challenge and it's frustrating for you, and yet you're not taking any initiative to help solve it. What's getting in your way? That's my favorite question, is what's getting in your way of doing this thing that we said together that you wanted to do? So I love the question of how do you sort of unleash them and support them to go do that. just have the right conversations. And if people aren't following through, that's what the conversation needs to be.
Well, great. I think that's everything. And if there's any last minute things you want to add before we sign off here for everyone.
Just hang in there. You can do this. You will not do it perfectly. None of us are doing this perfectly, but you will do your best and you will move forward. You'll learn and have the real conversations with your people. If they feel supported in this, it will do wonders for you going forward with whatever the new normal looks like eventually. If you have children at home, good luck, you've got this, you can figure it out. If you are caring for people who have been infected or caring for older parents, you've got this. It's hard, but you've got this. If you are living your best life because you're pausing for the first time in a long time, beautiful, keep it up, do good work. We will find a new normal and who knows what that will look like, but we're in it together and we're all here. Thanks for coming and learning. Any questions I can answer, any help I can provide, I'm here. info@Lessard Consulting and lessardconsulting.com, decisionflow.net. And I hope to hear from some of you.